Consumer Federation of California is very pleased to host with a well-known Sacramento reporter and author of a brand new book on our brand new vice president. My name is Richard Holliber. I am the president of the Consumer Federation of California. We are a nonprofit organization that fights for consumer rights, mostly at the state level, but also at the federal level and before regulatory agencies. My job is to welcome you. We're pleased that we're here with Dan Morain, someone that we have known, I have known, CFC has known for at least a couple of decades, who is one of the very finest reporters who has covered Sacramento and covers issues of great concern to everyone, including consumers. And I will turn it over to our executive director, Robert Harrell, who has served with us for a year as executive director. And before that, he was the deputy insurance commissioner for the state of California for several years. And prior to that, we knew Robert very well from the great work that he did in the Capitol, working for a couple of excellent lawmakers and running into him on a host of consumer issues. Wherever we turned, Robert was the go-to guy on many of the issues that we dealt with. So Robert, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Richard Holliber. Good afternoon, everybody. For those of you joining from the East Coast, good evening. I'm Robert Harrell. As Richard said, I'm the executive director of the Consumer Federation of California, and we're pleased to have this conversation this afternoon with longtime journalist, first-time author, and we'll talk a little bit about that, Dan Morain. Dan has written this book, Kamala's Way, available at bookstores now, but more importantly, also available through our through this conversation. Want to in advance thank Shana Batista of the Consumer Federation of California. She's sort of pulling the strings behind the scenes here. And she'll be popping in to the kind of chat function some hyperlinks. There will be two that will be semi-regularly rotating in. One will be if people wish to become a member of the Consumer Federation of California. For $30 or more, you will get a free copy of Kamala's Way. And then we also have worked out with Dan's Behemoth publisher, Simon & Schuster, a deal. So for $22, one can get the book, and that would include a shipping charge, and that represents a significant reduction from, I think, list price of the book is $28, if I'm not mistaken, Dan. So with that, let me introduce kind of properly Dan Morain, and then we'll begin conversing about the book. I should also note that folks can ask questions, and towards the end of the hour of the conversation, I will get to as many of those questions as is possible. So feel free to write your questions in under Q&A, and we'll get to all those. So thank you very much. With that, Dan Morain has worked in, been a journalist for decades. He was at the Los Angeles Times for how many years, Dan? 27?
27 years.
27 years. Based in Sacramento, but wrote a lot of national stories too, a lot about money and politics, a lot about all kinds of things. And so one of the best journalists around, he then moved over to the Sacramento Bee, where you had a column for a while, right? And then you became editorial page editor for a few years. And then Dan's worked some for Cal Matters the last couple of years. And then, lo and behold, we have this book. Your first book. I had not realized that. Maybe that's just because you were so busy being a journalist all these years. So let's begin a little bit about that. So obviously Kamala Harris, Vice President of the United States, we see her now. Now that the second Trump impeachment trial finished, the Biden administration is sort of retaking center stage, focusing on the COVID package, et cetera. And Kamala Harris, I think yesterday was one of her first big interviews with the Today Show, and she was, ever the team player, right? This is what vice presidents do. What made you? When did this idea come to you to write a book about her? What was the timing? And then I have a couple follow-ups that relate to Kamala Harris and folks contributing or being helpful or not.
Sure, sure. So I retired from Cal Matters, retired from daily journalism just about a year ago in March, and was taking long dog walks and hanging out with grandkids and doing occasional freelance pieces. And the Washington Post wanted me to do a piece on Kamala Harris, the Kamala Harris who I've known. I first wrote about her in 1994. Uh, that would be teed up to run if and when Joe Biden selected her as vice president. And so lo and behold, he did. So that was August 11th. And the editor on that, a delightful guy, terrific editor by the name of Michael Duffy, said, Morain, you really ought to write a book about Kamala Harris. Yeah, well, it's a great idea. Thank you. I'm flattered. And I just kind of I certainly didn't say yes. And I thought I had said no. But a couple weeks later, he sent me an email saying, you really ought to write a book about Kamala Harris. And he had a friend at Simon & Schuster who he called, and a terrific, an amazing editor by the name of Priscilla Payton. And she was all in on this. And so that's how it started. It was in the COVID time, I don't know what the equivalent is of a handshake deal, but it was it was over telephone and email. We agreed to the basic terms of this, and then separately, an agent by the name of Karen Brailsford was calling around trying to find a writer to write a book about Kamala Harris. And she came across the managing editor of the Sacramento Bee, a great guy, friend of mine, Scott LaBar. And LaBar said, well, Morain's not doing much anything. Why don't you ask him? And as an added benefit, I knew Kamala Harris. And so that's how it came to be. And beginning of September, and my deadline was November 3rd.
Yeah, so a lot in the notes of the book, I see a lot of the conversations occurred sort of September, October. So it was really, sounds like it was a kind of a two-month whirlwind. It is, I should note, I enjoyed reading the book, got it and read it quite quickly. It's funny, the book I had read just before that was Obama's book, 700 pages that only goes to basically when they get bin Laden in
Right.
May of 2011. And so there's another, but it's one book that turns into two, and there will be another book, I assume, in a year or two. I assume much of that's pre-written. Anyway, the contrast is a bit striking. I mean, you're someone who worked for a journalist for decades. You write like a journalist. It's a very brisk book. It's a very, I mean, the chapters, no chapter is 40 pages. The whole book is 225, and then notes and things like that. So it's sort of the antithesis in some ways of the Obama book, where there's, Obama book has all this sort of long, languid prose, and he writes beautifully. And, unlike some other politicos, you do know that Obama is certainly writing, not that he's, doesn't have editors and people working around him, but he's writing a lot of that himself. And he's an excellent writer. He's a, kind of a thoughtful writer, et cetera. Sure. And so, but the contrast is just so great, because you're really kind of, it's almost quick hits. And yet, when I think about any aspect of, I certainly learned quite a bit reading the book, although I felt like I knew a decent amount about Kamala Harris and her life and career. But no stone is really left unturned. And so kudos to that for the brisk read and everything.
If I had 9 weeks, I would have turned over more stones. If I had 4 months, I would have turned over more. This is the goal of this is to tell people who are interested in Kamala Harris who she is, how she got from Oakland, Berkeley, where she grew up, her first 12 years in Berkeley and Oakland, how she got from there to a heartbeat away from the presidency. And so, so while it was 2 months of 12-hour days, 7 days a week, kind of not doing anything other than this, it really tells a California story. I mean, it says it's Kamala Harris, an American life, but really it's in so many ways, it's a California story, I believe. And so many of the episodes that I write about are in the book are things that I covered as for the LA Times or for the Sacramento Bee, and some for Cal Matters, less for Cal Matters, but certainly the Sacramento Bee and the LA Times. So, I write about the Stockton schoolyard shooting back in 1989, and she was just out of law school in 1989. But there's a through line from there to when she was Attorney General, battling against guns in the hands of people who shouldn't have guns. There certainly are through lines from her time as Attorney General, working on the mortgage crisis with Beau Biden. And of course, that becomes so pivotal in Joe Biden's decision to select her as vice president. So there are stories here that I covered. I mean, Joe Biden, for example, came out in 2016 when she was running for the US Senate, and spoke to the California Democratic Party convention. And I was at that convention. I saw his speech. I was enthralled by his speech. I had met him once in 2007. I'm sure he doesn't remember. It was in Des Moines when he was running for president. But it was a terrific speech. It was and in that speech he talked about Beau Biden, and Beau Biden had been dead for about a little less than a year. Talked about his relationship with Kamala Harris. So many of the things I wrote about in the book are stories that I covered. Long-winded way of saying that it was more than 2 months.
Oh, that's exactly the, hopefully the kind of conversation we can have for the next 45 or so minutes. Now, obviously she was running for, vice president when you're writing this. How well would you say you knew her? And she did not participate in the writing of this book. She wrote her own autobiography, and it's, okay by political autobiography standards. It felt to me at the time, I have not read it in fairness, but it felt to me at the time like the book that someone who's going to run for president writes so that they can point to a book that they've written. And I say that in a non-pejorative way. It certainly left a lot out, some of which you illuminate in the book. Do you feel like did word go out through sort of Team Harris? Don't talk to this guy, talk to this guy. How well did you know her? Did that play into that? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. So I reached the agreement with Simon Schuster at the beginning of September, and within days I sent her press secretary for the campaign, Sabrina Singh, an email saying, I'm going to write this book. Obviously Kamala Harris knows who I am. We've spoken, many times over the years. And I'd like to talk with her. And mostly I wanted then Senator Harris to hear from me before she heard from her people, the people who I was going to interview, that I was working on this. So I don't know that I succeeded, but that was my effort, or that was my attempt. I sent the email. It took a week or so to hear back from Sabrina. She called and was polite, said no, we're not going to participate. But then throughout the 2 months, and then afterward too, I sent emails asking specific questions to specific points that I had, hoping that I would, get answers, and each was a polite no. I also tried to interview Kamala Harris's sister, Maya Harris, and that was a polite, firm no. I tried to interview her father, who's still alive, and never heard back from him. Did she put out the word not to talk with me? I doubt it, but I wasn't shocked that she was running, in her view, to save democracy. She had other things on her mind. In the Biden campaign, they were very disciplined, and so I didn't blame them at all for not talking with me. And really, if I were Kamala Harris and I knew somebody was going to be writing a biography of me, I'm not sure I'm the guy she would sit down and talk with. I wrote some pretty critical pieces about her when she was AG, and
I mean, you were a journalist for the biggest paper in the state for much of that time, and then one of the biggest papers in the state for another part of that time, and was well known. And she certainly knew that you were going to be fair and even-handed, and that might not always reflect well on her, but that more often than not. Do you feel like in writing the book, did you feel like you gained a better appreciation of who she is and what makes her? And do you feel like I don't want to say because, likability, it can be such a loaded term, and we're going to get to that in the conversation about how that plays for male politicians versus female politicians. But do you feel like you kind of understood better or respected where she had come from more than you did going into the project?
Oh, absolutely. As a newspaper, as a columnist, you write a column, and you've got a day or two or three to put it together, and it's in the paper, and you move on to the next one. This gave me the time to go back and really look at some of the decisions, some of the things that I had written, and the decisions that she had made, and just gain a better understanding of it. So yeah, I mean, it's always the case that the more you know about something, the grayer it becomes. And so yeah, I learned things about her that I had no idea about. I gained insight into the reason she made certain decisions. For example, the Trump University. She chose not to sue Trump University. I didn't write that story when I was at the Bee. This was in 2016. She was running for the U.S. Senate. But it was a head scratcher to me. Why would she not sue the Trump University? The state of New York had sued Trump University over its basically bilking the people who went there trying to figure out how to become billionaires in real estate.
What was the $25 settlement?
Yeah,
he
it's
to get out of the way so he would stop having to be forced to talk about it on the campaign trail.
Yeah. So it would have gained her a lot of press attention, certainly, had she filed that lawsuit. It was a case that was decided, and as folks listening to this will recall, in San Diego, federal court in San Diego, she certainly had jurisdiction. She could have piggybacked on the suit, but she didn't. And so, it would have gotten her a lot of press attention. She didn't file the suit. Why not? Well, I feel like I came away understanding her decision a lot better.
Yeah, I mean, the contrast there is Corinthian. There were as a number, and this is obviously an issue that CFC works on. We're part of the sort of coalition to crack down on for-profit colleges and how they build people, and it's related to student debt and so many issues. But Corinthian had a much bigger footprint in California than Trump University did. You noted the judge in San Diego. If I remember, that's the judge that Trump also attacked because he was of Mexican heritage, and somehow, even though he was born in the United States, a citizen, et cetera, but somehow his Mexican heritage made him suspect, and which sort of is a little bit like the canary in the coal mine in many ways for how Trump views the world, how his presidency was, this sort of scorched earth view. I want to spend a couple minutes, not too much time, but a little bit of time briefly on her earlier years. A Jamaican father who's a professor, economics professor, Indian mother who's a cancer researcher. They meet in the 60s. She writes the sort of, nice family-friendly version of this for her autobiography. Her mother has passed away. She's clearly a major influence on her life. It's a thread throughout your book about this drawing on, whether you use the Kali figure in many cases in the book, the wisdom of her mother, clearly much closer. Her father is still alive. There, as far as you can tell, there's no or little relationship there. It even popped up a little bit in the campaign.
Right.
I think she was asked, if I remember correctly from the book, she was asked on the famous, the morning radio show, The Breakfast Club, which is huge in the African-American community, did you smoke pot? And she made it sort of a joke like, hey, half my family's Jamaican, you know, ha, ha, ha. And her father kind of took umbrage, wrote a piece that became a bit of an embarrassment. Is that reflective of the fact that they really don't have a relationship? Or do you think that, I mean, what's your sense of that? Because
well, you know, so this is, you know, obviously a question that any biographer would put to a subject. So yeah, of course, I would love to know more about the dynamic and between her father and her and Maya, her younger sister. What she has said is not very much. I mean, this is a woman who has lived a very public life, right? Certainly since 2004, when she was sworn in as San Francisco District Attorney. You know, her life has been public, but we know very little about aspects of her life, and one of those is her relationship with her dad. You're right, they split when she was 5, so about 1969, and their divorce was final in 1972. The divorce papers show that he had joint custody. He could see them on the weekend, see his daughters on the weekend. And mind you, he was just in Palo Alto, and his girls were in Oakland or in Berkeley, you know, so it's, you know, a short drive.
Yeah, he's teaching at Stanford for many years. Yeah.
Pardon me?
He's teaching at Stanford for many years.
Yeah, he was a professor of economics at Stanford. So clearly they had a relationship. He brought them to Jamaica. He showed them where he grew up, and so she has a feeling for her Jamaican roots. But what she has said is that you know, he's a nice guy, but we're just not that close. So what does that mean? I don't know. You know, if I had asked that question and she had given me that answer, I think I probably would have asked a third, fourth, and fifth question. I should say that from a journalist's point of view, she's very good at answering questions when she wants to answer questions. And when she doesn't want to answer questions, she's even better. Yeah. So you can ask a question, if she doesn't want to answer it 10 different ways, and you'll never get that answer.
This is probably one of the things, and you've covered many, many politicians over the course of your career, that I think separates out really effective, savvy politicians from those that don't quite make the cut when they try to kind of move up the political ladder, and most do want to. It's an important point. I think it also links to one of the main themes of the book, which I'm going to get to in a minute, which is her cautiousness, her selective cautiousness on certain issues, and her occasional boldness on other issues when you know, what that calculation's like. So the one thing that I found very interesting that I did not know is that, you know, her mother, a cancer researcher from India, has been passed over essentially for a promotion and takes a job at McGill University, one of Canada's best known and best respected universities. And so they moved to Montreal, they moved to Quebec, the sort of French speaking heart of Canada, which I would imagine is probably not an easy transition. And she's in, I think, a French language school for a little while, and then goes to a fairly well-known English language high school in Montreal. I was not aware of that sort of Canadian history. Then moves on to Howard University, where she appears to really sort of identify with her African-American part of her heritage. And that becomes, I think, seminal to her. She still refers to it quite frequently. She speaks very fondly of Howard, and also some of the really important, particularly African-American women's sororities and groups that, you know, have been kind of helped propel her, really, if you look at sort of her, you know, her support base, donor base, and things like that. Some of those groups have been really important. Was there anything in that era there that kind of struck you? That it didn't feel very inevitable? That, you know, later you can sort of look at these inevitable steps, but at that point, you sort of, a human being's being formulated, one could argue.
Yeah. Well, you're right. So, I mean, she was in Montreal from age 12 to about age 18, right? So these are really formative years.
Yeah.
Um, and she didn't speak French. I don't believe she's fluent to this day. Um, but she had to have picked up some because it's hard to get by in Montreal without speaking French.
Yeah.
And not that I do. Nonetheless, you're right. She goes to Howard, and Howard, I think everybody's college experience is really important. Hers struck me as really important, really to the core. She writes in her autobiography, and you're right, she leaves a lot out of her autobiography. She writes about marching against apartheid. She forms lifelong friendships. I talked to two of her classmates from Howard, and they talk about her like a sister. These are people who she has kept in touch with over the decades. So yeah, I mean, Howard is a very special place in her heart, and I think really in the hearts of all Howard alumni. It's kind of it's my failing. I didn't know very much at all about Howard, historically Black colleges generally, but specifically Howard. And I should have. It's a failing in my education. But I had the opportunity to read the history of Howard, and my God, it's such a rich story about its creation by this awful racist who replaced Abraham Lincoln, a drunkard, a conspiracy theorist, a racist president who did his damnedest to keep Black people down. But this university was created to lift formerly enslaved people up, and what a rich story it is. So yeah, she was not a great student. She went to Hastings, University of California School of Law, Hastings. It's a very good law school. It's produced great lawyers and California Supreme Court justices. It's not Stanford. It's not Harvard. It's not UC Berkeley School of Law. And she didn't graduate with honors, right? She was not at the top of her class at all. So,
yeah, it's funny because there is such a bit of it is an East Coast bias. I know that as a first-time author, you've encountered some of that. Full disclosure to those who are watching, Dan and I, in one of the kind of mini pre-conversations helping set this up, I sort of asked him how the book tour is going, right? And we may have some time at the end to get to that and more. But I have not read, but I'm aware of a book by Evan Osnos, who writes for the New Yorker magazine about Joe Biden. Yeah, granted, being president is different from being vice president. Having said that, I think it almost kind of blanketed the airwaves. And that feeds into this same East Coast bias, right? Did you go to Harvard Law School? Did you go to Yale Law School? It's basically everybody on the Supreme Court, with the exception of one now. The newest judge, Amy Coney Barrett, went to Notre Dame Law School, which is not a bad law school. And yet there was this sort of like, looking down, right? Oh, well, it's not Ivy League or whatever. And that does, so not only in politics to a certain extent, in terms of pedigree, right? And overwhelmingly, it's law school that we're talking about, though not exclusively. And then also in the book world, this sort of East Coast, right? You've mentioned in the book, like it travels from East to West, right? Have you felt that at all in terms of, COVID book tour, right? It's all virtual. You're sitting in your office and you don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to travel to Politics and Prose bookstore in DC, even though that's a great place to go have a book talk, right? Can you kind of weave those two together a little bit? And then we'll jump into her march up as DA and AG.
Sure. Well, so I have read Evan Osnos' book on Biden. It's interesting. I'm not a student of Joe Biden. I'm not a student of Washington politics. It's a fine book, um, and you're right. I mean, it's just a reality. That's okay. I worked for the LA Times, not the New York Times. It it I feel like we do our own thing out here and try to play our own game, and not and try not to play the East Coast game. I much prefer the West Coast to the East Coast. Um, uh, that said, but yeah, sure, of course, there is there. I mean, I just think it's the reality. Those of us who have spent our careers in California understand that there is an East Coast bias, but that's okay. It's okay.
Yeah, and I say, and I'm always careful now more than ever about using the word bias, right? Because you talk, because it got so tarnished, I think, in the Trump
Right.
administration. Fake news, and in other words, any fact. First of all, facts don't matter. Anything I don't agree with is fake news. It's made up or whatever.
Yeah.
Yet there is. I mean, look, all these big conglomerates are based back east. They're based in New York. DC is a major pull. And so there's the joke is that it's like, oh, the California story, right? They sort of do something about how kooky or earthy, crunchy or whatever we are out west. And then, and then that's it. Then they kind of revisit that a few months or something.
Yeah.
But there's obviously a lot going on as a California native.
Well, I mean, again, this is a California story. I mean, Kamala Harris, I mean, I don't believe Kamala Harris could have happened in any other state. This is, you think about her mom. Her mom was 19 years old, really, obviously, a very, very brilliant person. 19, wants to become a scientist, can't do it in India. So in 1959, she persuades her parents, her father really, that she should be able to come to Berkeley. My God, it's I think a 13-hour time difference. It's the other side of the world. She's never been to the States, and here she is at UC Berkeley. I mean, what a gutsy woman that is. But it's Berkeley. It's not Yale. It's not Princeton. She comes to Berkeley because it's a land grant university. She can afford it. It's welcoming to a student from India who's got a passion to become a scientist. And her father, economics professor. I'm sure he could have gone to the University of Chicago. He could have gone, to any Wharton. Who knows where he could have gone? But he chose the University of California at Berkeley. She rose through politics in California. Can you imagine Kamala Harris being elected in Texas or Illinois? I don't, maybe Illinois, maybe. Barack Obama did, but he's a different kind of guy. I can't imagine her in New York or Maryland or many other states. So anyway, I view it as this is a child of California, and I don't think it could have happened. Her story could have happened in any other state, certainly not in any other country.
It's impossible to know for sure, but I do think, I mean, Barack Obama is a good example. And yet, if you look at Obama's history, he tries to move up a little too quickly, takes on Bobby Rush, gets creamed, and is really this close to kind of like one more race. And then he and Michelle have, Michelle, who's never been a big fan of the political world, I think it's fair to say.
Right.
And it's this close to being like, okay, one more chance, and then it's done. That's fine. He's a law professor. He'll do well. They have two great kids, whatever. So it's so interesting when you look at these things and how it plays out in a life, especially a life like this. So let's move on. Let's change the pace. So she gets out of Hastings. She's sort of in the Alameda County DA's office. She's a junior member there, and she begins to kind of move up. And I want to be so careful about the next topic that I want to briefly talk about, because I think it's something that, because I think some of the sort of right-wing media sphere is, I think rightly, very afraid of Kamala Harris, potential future president of the United States. They have taken every opportunity to try to and part of that is, I think, has race to do with it. I think part of it has sex to do with it. Part of it is all these other isms that we're trying as a country to shed ourselves of. And
Well, it's California, an anti-California view too.
That's right. The
Yeah.
wacky lefty stuff, right? San Francisco as well. So they have tried to portray Kamala Harris, I think deeply unfairly, as the byproduct of Willie Brown. And this has been a recurring thing. Now, having said that, Willie Brown is not an unimportant person in the development of her political career. And even after their relationship ended, and you point out in the book, there's a few kind of key moments. You know, he convinces Antonio Villaraigosa that he shouldn't be AG, that actually he should really defer to Kamala.
Senate, yeah.
But he sort of pops up, you know, and she calls Willie Brown an albatross. She publicly, SF Weekly, a piece I think that you mentioned in the book, distances herself. And yet he does kind of help make certain introductions even after their relationship ends. Can you just talk a little bit about that? And I say that with that sort of disclaimer because I want to make sure that it's not viewed as falling into this sort of crazy view that, oh, Willie Brown made her, which is absolutely not true. And yet he's not unimportant to her development as a political figure.
Yeah, no, of course. No, he's very important to her, absolutely, without a doubt. So I should say that although I've spoken to Mr. Speaker Mayer many times over the decades, he did not talk with me for this book. Her relationship with Speaker Brown played out in the columns of Herb Caen. Herb Caen announced their relationship in 1994, and he announced the end of their relationship in 1995 after Speaker Brown was elected mayor before he was sworn in. So those of us who covered the legislature, and I was here in the 1990s, know that Willie Brown had he had relationships with a lot of women who are not his wife. He has, I don't know, his relationship with Blanche, his wife, the mother of 3 of his children.
For decades, and
but they haven't lived together, and she's aware of his various affairs. Anyway, all that said, of course he helped her. She was there during his campaign for mayor. She went to campaign events for him. She was in planning sessions. She learned a lot about politics from Speaker Brown as he was running for mayor. And so that is certainly the case. That's certainly the case that he helped her. I should say that Willie Brown got a lot of help from Phil Burton. Phil Burton was his Willie Brown would not have been elected to the California Assembly in 1964 if it weren't for Phil Burton. Willie Brown would not have succeeded in the Assembly without his good friend John Burton and without Phil Burton's help. Now, ultimately, obviously, Willie Brown became a power unto himself, but every politician, from Willie Brown to Kamala Harris to Bill Clinton to Joe Biden, has people who have helped them along the way. And yeah, sure, Willie helped her. Is he wholly responsible for her being a heartbeat away from the presidency? Absolutely not. I mean, that's crazy. And there are people in her political life who are, who are, more important at this point, certainly, than Willie Brown. He helped her at the beginning. Phil Burton helped him. That's kind of the way of politics. That's how I see this. I also see it as a fundamentally unequal relationship. I mean, he was 30 years her senior. She was an adult. Her eyes were wide open. But it was.
You have and I'll close this topic.
No.
You have a great quote from him that I don't have the reference right here handy in my dog-eared version of the book, but it's something to the effect of, it was a great, she was in love with me and I was in love with me, Willie Brown.
Yeah.
Which is
Right.
laughable and
Right.
very Willie Brown-esque, and yet. So let's move on, because I don't want to spend too much time on that. I think the next big opportunity for her is she runs for district attorney of San Francisco. She's working her way up the ladder. There's some speculation she might run for city attorney in San Francisco. She takes on Hallinan, who had been, is his own kind of San Francisco. And you write about this in the book, Dan, and I think it's really an important point. San Francisco bare knuckles politics is probably one of the reasons why most of the statewide elected officials tend to come from either San Francisco or nearby, as opposed to Southern California. Now that is beginning to change a little bit, but it's certainly still way disproportionate. So there's a style of politics there that is very hard edged. And I think when you go through that training ground, which Kamala Harris absolutely did, she had some kind of wealthy friends and others that you talk about in the book who helped her kind of establish this. She's raising, there's a $500 per contribution limit, and she raises a ton of money at those 500 pops, which indicates that people are seeing something in her. She is very appealing. And in fact, to the point where she even has to be careful about that, right? In a way that is that classic double standard between female political figures and male political figures. She moves up, she takes on Terry Hallinan, and she didn't, some of my progressive friends have talked about, well, she ran to his right. And that's true to a certain extent, although Terrence Hallinan had his own problems in the city. You talk about some of them, and a very difficult relationship with the police unions, shall we say. But it was more nuanced than just running to his right, but she definitely saw an opportunity there. And she did enough to kind of position herself so that she could talk about being a better manager. She could use the things that she brought to the table as an advantage. Can you talk about that race, and then how that then led into deciding, okay, I'm going to run for AG now. I'm going to now I'm going to move at light speed, because it seems like it really accelerates very quickly.
Yeah. Well, when I was working on this book, I kept thinking about the word that I think most is most emblematic of Kamala Harris, and that word is transition. She is a transitional figure. So when she was running for district attorney, she goes to the San Francisco Public Library and gets photocopies of all the district attorneys who came before her, and of course they're all white men, and she puts them on a brochure, and she's obviously not a white guy. And then she runs for California Attorney General. She makes that announcement right after Barack Obama's elected president. So she's sworn in for her second term as district attorney, and right after that, Obama's elected president, and right after that, she announces her candidacy for attorney general in 2010. So this is 2008, and she's already running for California Attorney General. So and there again, everyone before her, from Jerry Brown to John Van de Kamp to Stanley Mosk to everyone, Earl Warren, they're all white men, and she's not. So she's a transitional figure. She's also a woman in a hurry, without a doubt. She is. She knows that she's a very good candidate. She's a very good politician, a very good retail politician, although that didn't particularly come through during her presidential race. So yeah, she's a woman in a hurry, without a doubt, and understands that she's got certain advantages that are advantages now, but none of this was preordained. None of this was inevitable that Kamala Harris would beat Terrence Hallinan. It was an uphill battle. He had a huge name ID in San Francisco. She didn't. She was the underdog running against Steve Cooley, the LA County District Attorney, for California Attorney General. So much so that Bill Lockyer a former attorney general predicted Cooley would win. I was among the editorial writers who endorsed Steve Cooley. I wrote the editorial for the Sacramento Bee, took the lead in writing the editorial for the Sacramento Bee, endorsing Cooley. So without a doubt, she was the underdog, less so when she ran for the U.S. Senate, but there again, she was moving quickly. She was basically sworn in for her second term as Attorney General, and in fewer than 2 weeks, she announced her candidacy for U.S. Senate. So yeah, so she moved quickly.
It's a meteoric rise, and obviously there's a lot of people who would like to have that kind of meteoric rise, but whether it's a combination of their own skill set and ability to communicate and connect with people, and or other fortuitous things that happen. Luck always does play a role in some of these things.
Yeah, well, it's good timing, good fortune.
Yeah, and you make
good politics.
Right, and the saying, to a certain extent, the saying is you make your own luck, right? And I think that certainly is the case here. I want to one of the themes that I want to talk about a little bit now, and just a reminder for those who are watching, if you have questions, go ahead and pop them in the chat. And we'll try to get to those. And if not, I've got plenty of questions lined up anyway for Dan. And also, if you want to become a member for $30, you will get a free copy of Kamala's Way, Dan's book. You can also, if you just want the book, you can get that for $22. That includes shipping. And if Dan's nice enough, I might even get him to sign a couple of these things.
I'd be happy to do that. I noticed a question from Beverly Ortiz. Yeah, yes, of course, Beverly.
We thank her for her membership, and you will get your assigned book headed your way. So there's a passage I would like you to read, and it ties into this notion of being cautious and being selective about that. It's on, if it's okay with you, Dan, it's on page 93. It's sort of that last significant paragraph there.
Sure.
On the other side of that, we're going to talk a little bit about a few issues where that manifested itself, particularly as she was AG.
Sure. Harris failed to take stands on several other criminal justice initiatives during her tenure, including one promoted by Gavin Newsom when he was California's lieutenant governor to reduce sentences for drug offenses and property crimes, and one by Jerry Brown giving hope for parole to felons serving long sentences if they follow prison rules by taking classes and learning a trade. Harris, the lifelong opponent of capital punishment, also declined to take stands on initiatives to abolish the death penalty during her time as Attorney General in 2012 and 2016. They failed by relatively narrow margins. Nor did she take a stand on a third measure, one sold to voters in 2016 as a way to hasten executions. Dane Gillette, the retired chief of the criminal division, co-wrote that initiative. It passed, though the promised executions never occurred. Like all death penalty laws, the measure to speed up executions became entangled in litigation. Over the decades, Californians repeatedly voted for the death penalty. The state has by far the largest number of condemned inmates of any in the union, but because of court decisions and opposition from Democrats who control state politics, California probably will never carry out another execution.
And so two things on that. One, obviously, Governor Newsom has had something more recently when he took over. But it speaks to this cautiousness. So I want to just run through quickly a few of the issues where I think progressives were disappointed by and large with some of the aspects of her tenure as Attorney General. And I wanted to just get your take on that. Some of those you covered as a reporter for the Times or the Bee or wrote about, and others less so. Number one, the deal with the banks. So the progressive argument there is it was a horrible national deal, and good for her that she didn't sign on to that, and yet she only made it a tiny little bit less horrible on the deal that she ultimately did sign on. And as you point out, some of your colleagues at the LA Times at the time pointed out, it didn't necessarily keep people in their homes. That's one. Do you want to go? Do you want to do one at a time, or you want me to just
Sure. Yeah.
list?
Yeah. I mean, when she came into office, so she comes into the office of AG in 2011, and recall California is still reeling from the mortgage meltdown, the recession. We've got California has a $27 billion budget deficit. So we as a state are in a world of hurt. There already had been negotiations over the settlement of nationwide settlement of litigation against the banks over some of its practices related to the meltdown. She could have joined it. That would have been, I suppose, easy. Just kind of gone along with the other states, but she didn't. Part of that was, I think, was being pushed by New York Attorney General then Eric Schneiderman. Gavin Newsom was a player here as well. He signed on to a letter urging that the state not settle for what she had called crumbs on the table. And so she didn't. She pushed for a bigger settlement. It ended up being 18 billion, maybe 20 billion. But people still lost their homes. It didn't fix the crisis. She got more for the state than she otherwise would have gotten. In so doing, she had to buck the Obama administration. So this is now in 2012 when the agreement signed, and she's holding out. And remember, Obama in 2012 is running for re-election, and if you were betting at the beginning of 2012 whether Obama would win re-election, you would bet against him. You would bet that Mitt Romney would have won. So he really wanted the Obama administration really wanted a deal. I know this is not in the book, but I know that David Plouffe was involved in this. I mean, everybody in the who could have pushed for the settlement did.
There was a lot of pressure on her to agree to that.
Pressure on her to fold. She got more for the state than she would have gotten. That said, it was a terrible mortgage crisis, and no settlement would solve that. Homes that once were owned by families to this day are owned by Wall Street investment firms and are rented out. So I mean, to this day we haven't recovered. I don't know that we ever will as a state. So she did more than what she got more for the state than what the initial offer.
The other big one of major criticism is sort of criminal justice reform. And the passage that you just read, thank you very much, speaks to that. That she picked her spots. She was not overly bold in that area. It came up in her presidential campaign, which as we wind down, I want to touch base on briefly. But you also point, so I want to say that not so much to spend a lot of time talking about what more she could have done on criminal justice reform, because I think most of our viewers are well aware of some of the issues that were in play at that time. But maybe some of the things that it feels like you brought out where maybe another side of her came out. Some of the conversations relating to sexual exploitation, a woman who lived with their family in Montreal, who apparently had quite a profound influence on her in thinking about these kinds of issues and helping victims of sexual exploitation. And marriage equality, she was not the lead, that was more Gavin Newsom, at least the public perception was. And then it feels like you bring out a sort of a more human side of her that really isn't seen as much. And contrary to the perception of, where there's a camera, there's an elected official, you point out, in fairness, a number of examples where could have, and many other people would have, done a presser, been out there in front of the cameras, and she chose not to. Can you speak to that a little bit and how it threads through a few of these issues?
Yeah. Well, I was here. I was in Sacramento working for the Sacramento Bee panel, trying to pay as much attention to the AG's office as I could. I don't remember a single perp walk that she presided over. She didn't do very many press conferences. Certainly not in Sacramento. The instance, and you're right. There are many battles that she chose not to engage in as it related to criminal justice issues, police misconduct, that sort of thing. She didn't want much to do with that. But there were other examples where she did take a leadership role. Certainly, trying to keep guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them was one. But the other big one really was the case of Backpage.com, which was, as she described it, an online bordello. She authorized her deputy, Maggie Krell, an attorney in Sacramento now, to pursue them criminally. And that pressed the bounds of federal law, and she lost initially. A state judge sided with the Backpage people, basically saying this was an area preempted by federal law. She could not she charged the executives of Backpage with pimping, and not pimping necessarily of adults. Her focus was on minors who were being trafficked in the classified section of Backpage. Little girls, 13-year-old girl, 16-year-old girl, just, awful stuff. So that was her focus. She authorized the refiling of that case after she had been elected to the U.S. Senate, but before she was sworn in, to bring it as a money laundering case, and that case is still pending. And this is an example where she could have done a press conference. The search of Backpage's office was in Texas, and Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, who was clearly not the lead on this case, held a press conference. She did not. It's just, it was not her way. It was just, for whatever reason. And it's one of the questions I would have asked her had I had the opportunity. Why didn't you hold a press conference on Backpage? It's interesting to me.
Yeah, it's fascinating. At first I thought, well, it's more popular to be against child exploitation than it is to take on police misconduct, without a doubt. It's less. Having said that, when you have opportunities in some of those very popular issues, right, or things that you think would be to your political advantage, wouldn't you play that to the maximum? And in fairness, she didn't sometimes. And so it's very interesting. That's why I want to get your thoughts about that. I want to transition, if it's okay with you, Dan, if you have a handful more minutes, I don't want too long here. We finish these up, we record them, we kind of put them up on our page and on YouTube and stuff, and then people can look later. I don't want to spend much time about her US Senate campaign because it really was a bit of a thud. She ran hard, ran fast, amassed a ton of money, and wound up facing Loretta Sanchez, whose claim to fame was taking out B1 Bob Dornan down in Orange County, where I'm originally from. When I grew up, it was like Bill Dannemeyer was like my congressman, so there'd be these like 432 to 2 votes in the House floor, and Dannemeyer was almost always one of the two. So that tells you how much Orange County has changed as well, by the way, even with the clawbacks of the last 2 years. So she beats Sanchez easily. But even as they literally, you write about, and I think this is there, even if you want, you can read this passage. There's a passage in your book about, she has this is 2016, election night, etc. She's been elected to the US Senate. She wins easily, 25 points or whatever. And she has this nicely prepared speech because she's anticipating, like many people, that Hillary Clinton is about to become president of the United States and shatter that ultimate glass ceiling of a woman president. Obviously, we know what happens. She loses, as the night gets longer, it gets darker for many and many people. And she rips up that speech and she delivers instead a different speech, where she uses the word fight, like 26 times or something. Do you, if you want to read that passage, I know that.
Well, it goes on a while, but yeah, I mean, it is the case. So election night, they assume Hillary Clinton's going to win. Everybody assumes it. Me at the Sacramento Bee, we had written an editorial congratulating Hillary Clinton. Of course, we didn't publish that. At about midnight, I tore that one up and wrote a Trump editorial. She tore up her speech, and she basically said, we're going to fight. We're going to fight on behalf of Black Lives Matter. She singles them out specifically. We're going to fight on behalf of undocumented immigrants. She lays out basically her plan for the next 3-4 years, that she is going to be in every opportunity, taking every opportunity to be part of the resistance to Donald Trump. And she does that. She goes back to Washington at the beginning of 2017, and she is a very liberal vote. Whatever caution she had as Attorney General, whatever stand she declined to take as Attorney General, well, she took him as a U.S. Senator. She was out there.
And why do you think, very briefly, why do you think that is? I mean, the sort of cynical version of that is, well, because it was a heck of a lot more popular to be for those things when you're one of 100 and you have Donald Trump as president, and you're also thinking about the fact that you're probably going to run for president someday soon. Yeah. Versus your AG, yeah. You actually have some responsibility for some of these things. What's your take on that?
Well, I think that she was freer as a U.S. Senator to take stands, to be to be more herself as Attorney General or District Attorney. I mean, your job, you're a politician, of course, but your job is also to enforce the law. So, so here you have somebody who is a lifelong opponent of capital punishment running for Attorney General. And the job of that office, of a whole section of that office, is to defend death verdicts. She promised to enforce the law. Other attorneys general had taken that same view, going back to Stanley Mosk in the 1960s. He was a death penalty opponent, but enforced the law. But as a U.S. Senator, you're freer. You can take a stand on what you think the law ought to be. She introduced a bunch of bills as a U.S. Senator. None of them went anywhere. I should say there is one notable exception, though. Her stand against Backpage really did help shape, as Attorney General, really did help shape the national debate. Although a judge here in Sacramento concluded that the state was preempted under the Communications Decency Act from bringing pimping charges. Other states then followed suit, and most importantly, the U.S. Justice Department brought an indictment against Backpage, which is pending down in Phoenix, in a case to go to trial this year. So she really did force the issue, and then Donald Trump signed a bill that made an exception so that states can in fact bring cases against the successors to Backpage over child exploitation. So anyway, she forced the issue.
I want to briefly touch on the presidential race, and then how she became the vice presidential candidate. And I am cognizant of the time, and I'm going to weave in then at the end a couple of the questions that I've been looking at in between. So she runs for president, and you mentioned the sort of, when all is said and done, the sort of acrimony within her campaign. There's this 3,000 word New York Times article, like kind of deconstructing what happened. We haven't talked much about her sister Maya. They're very close. She's one of her arguably closest political advisors. Maya's husband. closest? Do you think, bar none? I mean, she has a cadre of consultants that she's had for a bunch of years who she's close to, but it feels like Maya is probably her closest political advisor. So there's that famous moment in one of the first debates, I think it's June of 2019, and it's the famous "That Little Girl Was Me" speech, which was clearly pre-prepared. She knows, like most of us did, that Joe Biden was the early front runner. The question was whether he was going to run a better race than he had the other times he'd run for president, pilfering Neil Kinnock's UK labor speeches in the first race, and never even, they jokingly refer to that, his people, as the 1987 campaign, because it didn't even turn the calendar page into 1988, if I remember correctly. Mm-hmm. And then again, he finishes like fifth in Iowa and is out very quickly. And Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, that's the two that goes forward, and ultimately it's Barack Obama. So she has the speech. It's about busing. It's because Biden has, I think, been seen fairly as sort of being a little cozy about the good old days with some of these segregationist senators that, Biden was 30 years old when he's first elected to the US Senate. He's a widower right when it happens, basically. And there were a different group of people in the Senate back then. She makes the speech. They have merchandise ready. You can buy your "That Little Girl" t-shirt the next day, which I think is amazing. So this is clearly
that night you could buy it.
Night. Pardon me. They're fundraising off of it, but that's common. But the merch is kind of amazing to me. And yet within the next week, she bumps up. She moves up to the top tier of candidates from tier 2 to tier 1. She's in play. Her, Warren, Biden, Bernie, kind of top tier. Turns out that her position on busing is basically the same as Joe Biden's now. And her campaign has to kind of explain that in a way that's very awkward. She makes some statements about the Affordable Care Act, and then it looks like she's for 3 different things at once, and then she has to clean that up. Talk a little bit about the campaign, and then the campaign after that campaign to kind of put her on the ticket as the VP.
Yeah, well, so it is certainly the case that this was not a flawless campaign. She was a friend of mine. I wasn't on the campaign trail. All I know is what I read, and people who were on the campaign trail talking to me about it. But no, she did not do well on the campaign trail. She understood going in that she had maybe a 10% chance of winning the nomination. She knew that it was a long shot, and the way to do that was to knock Joe Biden off his perch, and she had to win South Carolina. That was her recipe. If she could win South Carolina, if she could do well enough in Iowa and New Hampshire, and then win South Carolina, that would give her a huge bit of momentum heading into Super Tuesday. But she could never top. Joe Biden's support was deep in South Carolina, and so she could never knock him off that perch. So, she tried. She took her shot. It didn't work. Her campaign clearly never took off. Coming from California, you would think that she would have been led the fundraising pack. She never did. She never got smaller dollar donations in the way Pete Buttigieg did, or Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren did. She raised $12 million in that first quarter, which is mediocre. And you compare that to what Obama raised in his first quarter in 2007, 27 million. So, so she just never took off. That said, many candidates, many presidents have run for president before and didn't win their first time. Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan. I mean, a bunch of them haven't. And then a bunch of them who probably would have been good presidents never made it, right? Jerry Brown is one who, obviously ran many, many times and just, it just never worked for him. Bad timing, whatever it was. That's just kind of one of the realities. And then, how she rehabilitated herself, she dropped out Well, the drop-in was good, and in December, before she was on the Iowa caucus ballot, and before she was on the California ballot, it's good because she would have gotten her clock cleaned in California. That would have really weakened her. So she, she took some time off. She thought it through. She goes back to Washington at the beginning of 2020 when the campaign is still hot and heavy, and she becomes a senator. She introduces a whole bunch of bills, none of which go anywhere because it's Mitch McConnell's Senate. But she does what a senator's supposed to do, which is to be a senator. And then, George Floyd happens. I mean, Biden says he's going to pick a woman. Okay, that narrows it down. And then George Floyd dies under the knee of a Minneapolis cop, and that changes politics, and certainly for the Democratic Party, but also for America. And so it becomes more apparent that Biden's going to pick a woman and a person of color. That narrows the field kind of significantly. And when you look at the other candidates, I mean, Karen Bass is obviously a very skilled politician and a delightful person. But she's a member of Congress from LA. Nobody knows who she is outside of LA, and not even all that well, and I'm sure in her district.
But I did notice that people were dumping their Oppo research pretty quickly, because when there was a moment or two where Karen Bass was sort of moving up on the list, same thing with Val Demings, the congresswoman from Florida, who's very impressive, was one of the House impeachment managers for the first impeachment trial. Boy, a Karen Bass speech about a Scientology center that was in her district at an opening, that got out there. Something nice or not mean that she'd said about Fidel Castro, that was out there immediately. So clearly the Oppo.
Yeah, well, it would not have played well in Florida, but then Biden-Harris didn't do well in Florida anyway. Both those things, I mean, Scientology and Castro. But that said, I mean, Harris has had run for president. She had run statewide in California. She's been vetted. I mean, I guarantee you, this is not in the book, but I read the opposition research on Kamala Harris. I mean, I read it all. And I mean, not all of it, because I don't know what her team did on her behalf, but yeah, I read the opposition. There's nothing there. I mean, we know that she's a politician who's taken political stands, but there's just not much there. She's been vetted by journalists. You run for California Attorney General and U.S. Senator, and pretty good reporters take a look at you. And Michael Finnegan, Phil Wallon. I mean, these are very good reporters. Who and Carla Marinucci have all taken a look at Kamala Harris. So she's been vetted. To me, it became, I mean, it's not inevitable that a woman of color is going to be anybody's running mate. I mean, that is, it's never happened before. But when you think about who the options were after George Floyd and after Biden said he's going to pick a woman, well, I just think it was no shock that the Washington Post asked me to do a column about Kamala Harris in anticipation Joe Biden was going to pick her.
Yeah, I mean, Klobuchar kind of, because of her time as Hennepin County DA, there was stuff that came up there. Elizabeth Warren, it's I think reasonable to assume that she and Joe Biden, while they seem to like each other a little bit, don't have a particularly close personal relationship. And so, yeah, she kind of becomes, given these parameters, the front runner in a way, and then she gets back.
She's and then her relationship with Joe Biden. I mean, that is really important to Joe Biden. I mean, obviously, Joe Biden is so profoundly affected by the tragedies in his life, and certainly the death of his son Beau, and that he and Kamala Harris, formed a bond when they were both attorneys general, joining the suit against the banks. That had a profound effect on now President Biden, and he said that multiple times.
Right. And I think, I mean, you've read Osnos's book, I have not, but everything we kind of know about Joe Biden is that that sort of personal connection really matters to him.
Yeah.
And it felt like it made a difference. And I think in many ways, he's the anti-Trump, right? Some people look at presidents and they say, well, the next president is the antithesis of the previous one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Carter was organizing who played on the White House tennis courts. And so then you get Reagan, who famously delegated kind of everything to everybody. Philosophy, obviously quite different, et cetera. Trump is the anti-Obama, and now Biden is the anti-Trump. Biden cares about personal relationships, and that oozes through, and being a kind of a decent human being, and also the possibility
somebody who doesn't tweet. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm checking Twitter a whole lot less these days than I was a month and a half ago.
There's a sense of normalcy, which doesn't mean there aren't significant and important policy disagreements, but that even in the midst of, towards the end of a pandemic with a very difficult situation, that's kind of refreshing, like people can have a meal without worrying about who did Trump insult this last hour.
Yeah.
I want to leave you with a couple questions, and I'll weave in some of the questions that we've gotten from our viewers.
Sure.
Thank you very much to everybody. Again, if you want to become a CFC member for $30, you get a free copy of Kamala's Way here. You can also get the book itself for $22. That includes shipping, which is a discount. So let's wrap up. I know that you're not in the prognostication business. You're in the reporting historically business. Will Kamala Harris ever be president of the United States?
Well, I have little doubt, but that she's going to run. And I know, I sort of know Sacramento politics. I don't know DC politics. I do know the conventional wisdom in DC is that Joe Biden's going to be a one-term president. Maybe that's true. He's wanted to be president for a very, very long time. And so I think if his health is fine, he will run again. I don't see why he wouldn't. He would be 82. That's old. But, some people who are 82 are pretty spry. I don't know. Anyway, all that said, yeah, sure, she's going to run. Is it 2024 or 2028 or 2032? I don't know. But yeah, of course, she's going to run again for president. Will she be president? Well, first of all, it's really hard to get the nomination. And although the vice president is a presumed front runner, it's not going to be a coronation. She's not going to be handed the nomination. It's not going to be like running for U.S. Senate against Loretta Sanchez. And the Electoral College is slanted against Democrats and for Republicans. So, it's really hard to become president. There have only been 46 of them. So if you're Kamala Harris, yeah, you think you have a shot at it. But again, it's she I come back to the word transition. She is a transitional person. She is representative and emblematic of California, and what happens here does spread. It spreads to Arizona and Nevada and Colorado and New Mexico. But will it spread to enough states? Will it spread to 270 electoral college votes in 4 or 8 years? I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, it's so hard to know for sure, but
we can assume she will not win Idaho or Oklahoma.
Right.
Or many other states like that.
And there's a big difference, I think, between if she's running, if Biden does turn out to be one term, which I know is the conventional wisdom in DC, and I, like you, don't necessarily share that, assuming that his health sticks around. I think once you become president, you kind of want to keep being president as long as you really can. There's a big difference between running in 2024 as the sort of, vice president, heir apparent, if you will, versus 2028. It's hard for one party to hold the presidency for 3 terms. So then now you have the headwinds at you, and Lord knows what's going to happen between now and then. A million things can occur, right? So thank you.
It all comes down to certainly their handling of COVID. I mean, it all comes down to that. If we get out of this lockdown and you and I can can meet for a cup of coffee and not worry about infecting one another, and kids get back to school and all that sort of thing, and it all depends, and they're doing the right thing here. I mean, they can't do anything other than focus on COVID, and she understands that her success, her future depends on his success. So she has to do, she
Right.
has to be the best vice president she can be.
You turn the corner on COVID and you're going to have an economic expansion pretty significant. I mean, Trump was, legendary for overstating everything, but on this one, I actually don't think he was wrong. There is a ton of pent up demand here and people are itching to get out. Sometimes
Yeah. Well, I haven't been to a restaurant since March 6th, the night I retired. So
yeah, I mean, even with outdoor dining now, I look and I kind of go, ooh, like I'm picking up my stuff to go. So anyway, there was one other question we didn't get to. I want to make sure we do, and that was, and it's going back a little bit. Why did she look at other law schools, Dan? Why?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I don't know. I do know that she comes from a family of very, very, very high achievers. Harvard Law School and Stanford and that sort of thing. So, where she applied, I have no idea. Hastings is not chopped liver. It's a nice law, it's a very good law school. My daughter went there. It's one of my daughters. So I don't know. And why did she come back to California? Her mom and her sister were here, and her niece. And I think the family tie in the Harris family, it's not a large family, but it's an extraordinarily close family, at least on the mother's side, less so on the father. And what an extraordinarily California story that is in and of itself. This family that is sort of knitted together. Her husband married in 2014. Obviously, he's got a good relationship with his ex-wife. Doug Emhoff has, and their his two kids. And it's in a way it's charming, and and I think in every way it's charming. But it's all part of the California story.
Right. When the worst thing you see is that they're almost too sickeningly sweet, because they really do seem to genuinely, he's the first, second gentleman, etc.
Right.
Last question, and I want to thank you again, Dan, for taking the time.
This has been great, Robert. It's just been great. I love your questions.
We don't probably have as many people as the Commonwealth Club, but hopefully it was a good conversation nonetheless. What next for you? You've written a book now. You were a journalist for decades. You've written a book. Do you have it in you now? Are you thinking like, you know what, maybe I'd like to write another book, or what's next for you?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm sort of thinking about what the next thing is. I don't want to write another book in 2 months.
Yeah.
I don't want to, but if I had 6 months, I could. That would work. So I'm going to continue to freelance. I'm going to continue to be part of the Sacramento Press Corps, but on a freelance basis. Who knows? Maybe you've got a good story that you think I could help tell.
Well, the Consumer Federation of California is never shy about sharing our thoughts. So thank
you. Yeah. I should say Richard Holliber is. All the years that I covered the legislature, when I saw Richard working a bill, I paid my little ears perked up, or my big ears perked up. I always pay attention to what you guys are paying attention to.
That's nice of you to say, and I know Richard did it for many, many years, and so I have big shoes that I've been trying to fill here. It's great to have him as my board president. Look, I'm a lucky guy. Dolores Huerta's on my board, so which has scored me major, and appropriately so, major points with my daughter. With that, I want to thank you very much, Dan. Thanks for taking the time and having the conversation. We appreciate it very much.
Great.
We'll put this up on our website at some point, and YouTube. Yeah. And go ahead, Dan. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, so I'd be happy to figure out a place where I can drop by to sign some books, we'll do it in a socially distant way.
We
So
will,
you send me a note, tell me where and when. I'll make sure that Beverly Ortiz gets a
and,
and
yeah,
whoever else wants one.
yeah, we'll look at the data, and thank you very much, Dan. We'll figure out a place between Sacramento and Davis and figure it out. So,
All right, good. All right, hey, thanks so much.
thanks to all of you who participated, and with that, we wish you a good rest of the day and evening.
All right.